unbelievable pregnant cat with big belly crying, begging me to help her. What happens when a simple act of kindness towards a desperate pregnant cat spirals into a life-altering struggle? You'll follow Margaret's journey of compassion, but you won't believe the shocking choice she's forced to make that risks everything she holds dear. Find out what happens next. Subscribe, like, and listen to the full story now. The sound ripped through the oppressive quiet of the late October night, a thin, high-pitched wail that wasn't quite a cat's meow and wasn't quite a baby's cry, but some horrific, desperate blend of the two. Margaret Abernathy froze halfway between the sink and the dish rack, her hand hovering over a soapy plate depicting a cheerful cardinal. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the skeletal fingers of the old oak tree against her bedroom window. Upstairs, a familiar autumn sound. This was alien, raw, and saturated with a pain that resonated deep in her own chest, a hollow echo of griefs long buried. She turned off the kitchen faucet, the sudden silence amplifying the keening from beyond the back porch door. It came again, sharper this time, punctuated by a guttural sob that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. Her heart, a temperamental old engine, began to knock against her ribs. She lived alone on a quiet suburban street in Oakwood, Illinois, a place where the most dramatic nighttime event was usually a raccoon raiding Mr. Henderson's meticulously organized trash cans next door. This sound felt wrong, urgent. Hesitantly, Margaret moved towards the back door, the linoleum cool beneath her worn slippers. The porch light, usually kept off to save electricity, was dark, leaving the small concrete slab and the patch of dying grass beyond bathed in the weak, watery light of a clouded moon. She peered through the window, set into the upper half of the door. At first, she saw nothing but shadows and the silhouette of her empty wicker chairs. Then the cry again, closer now, right at the foot of the 3 wooden steps leading down to the yard. A shape detached itself from the deeper gloom, small, low to the ground, but impossibly swollen. It moved with a pained, shuffling gait, dragging its unnaturally distended belly. As it shifted into a patch of faint moonlight filtering through the clouds, Margaret gasped. A cat, a gray tabby, its fur matted and clumped with mud, and something darker she didn't want to identify. It was skeletal thin, except for the enormous taut drum of its abdomen. Its head was lifted, pointed directly at her door, and even from this distance she could see the glint of moisture on its face. Tears. No, that was fanciful. But the sound was undeniably a plea, a desperate primal begging. It opened its mouth, and that harrowing cry tore through the night, once more aimed directly at her. It wasn't just a cat in distress. It felt like an accusation, a demand. Help me. The sheer, unbelievable desperation radiating from the creature pinned Margaret in place, a cold dread mixing with a surge of unwilling empathy. What on earth was she supposed to do? Margaret Abernathy had lived in the small 2-story house on Elm Street for 45 years. 38 of those had been with Frank, whose laughter used to fill the rooms now occupied only by silence and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Since his passing 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, the silence had become her most constant companion. At 70, she maintained her routines with quiet determination, tending her small garden, though the roses seemed less vibrant without Frank to admire them. Volunteering at the local library twice a week and managing her modest budget derived from Frank's pension and her Social Security. Her days were orderly, predictable, and profoundly lonely, punctuated mainly by the drone of the television and polite, brief exchanges with neighbors like Mr. Henderson, whose primary conversational topic was the declining state of neighborhood vigilance. She wasn't inherently an animal person. Frank had been the one who'd occasionally leave out scraps for stray cats, who'd rescued a stunned robin that flew into the picture window one spring. Margaret appreciated animals from a distance, the way one appreciates a well-tended park. Pleasant to look at, but not something you necessarily bring into your meticulously kept home. Her house was clean, perhaps excessively, so each knick-knack in its place, a defense against the encroaching chaos of grief and solitude. An animal, especially a distressed animal, represented mess, disruption, and unforeseen responsibility. Yet the sound from the porch pierced through her carefully constructed defenses. It wasn't just the sound of an animal. It was the sound of imminent, desperate need. It reminded her uncomfortably of the frantic hours in the hospital waiting room, the feeling of utter powerlessness as Frank slipped away. She couldn't stand by and do nothing then, and the same instinct buried deep beneath layers of habit and caution stirred now. Taking a deep breath, Margaret unlocked the deadbolt and opened the back door a crack. The smell hit her first, damp fur, mud, and an underlying faintly metallic scent that spoke of sickness or injury. The cat flinched back, momentarily startled by the sudden movement, but didn't run. It just looked up at her, its green eyes wide in the dim light, reflecting a mixture of terror and pleading. Its breathing was shallow and rapid, its whole body trembling, not just from the cold autumn air, but from exertion, from pain. It let out another low, heart-wrenching moan, quieter this time, as if gathering its last reserves of strength to appeal to her. "Oh, you poor thing." Margaret whispered the words, escaping before her cautious mind could stop them. The cat's belly looked impossibly large, stretched so tight the skin seemed translucent. It was clearly in labor, heavily pregnant, and utterly alone. The thought was horrifying. Images flashed through her mind. The mess, the potential diseases, the cost. Mr. Henderson would undoubtedly complain. The responsibility felt crushing. But the cat just looked at her, shivering, its desperate gaze unwavering. It took a hesitant step toward the sliver of warmth and light spilling from the kitchen. Unbelievable, Margaret thought. A pregnant cat crying on my doorstep, begging me to help her. It felt like something out of a bizarre, tear-jerking movie. Yet here it was, starkly real and demanding a response. This was the moment, the pivot point between her quiet, controlled solitude and something unknown, messy, and potentially heartbreaking. She could close the door, call animal control in the morning, if they even dealt with strays anymore, budget cuts being what they were, and try to ignore the sounds, or she could act. Frank's voice echoed faintly in her memory from years ago, when she'd hesitated over taking in a rain-soaked parcel someone left on the porch. "Maggie, sometimes you just gotta do what's right, not what's easy." With a sigh that seemed to release years of pent-up caution, Margaret pulled the door open wider. "All right," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "All right, come on in. Just try not to make too much of a mess." She stepped back, holding the door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the silence Frank had left behind. The cat, as if understanding, hesitated only a second longer before dragging itself painfully over the threshold and collapsing onto the worn welcome mat just inside the kitchen. The inciting incident wasn't a grand choice, but a small, compassionate yielding to an undeniable plea. Margaret closed the door against the night, shutting out the familiar quiet and letting in a world of unknown, urgent need. The immediate reality was chaos contained within the small frame of the exhausted cat. It lay panting on the mat, occasionally twitching as a ripple of contraction passed through its swollen belly. Margaret felt a surge of panic. What now? She knew nothing about delivering kittens. Her first instinct was warmth and comfort. She grabbed an old soft blanket Frank used to keep on his armchair, folded it carefully, and gently nudged the cat onto it in a relatively quiet corner of the kitchen, away from drafts. The cat offered no resistance, merely letting out a low groan. Margaret filled a shallow saucer with fresh water and placed it near the cat's head. It ignored it. Food! She rummaged through her pantry, canned tuna, too salty. Probably milk. She vaguely remembered hearing milk wasn't good for cats. She found a can of plain low-sodium chicken breast she kept for emergencies. She shredded a small amount and offered it tentatively. The cat sniffed weakly, but turned its head away. Its focus was entirely internal, consumed by the impending birth. Her mind raced. A vet. She needed a vet. It was late, well past 10 p.m. Would anyone even be open? She fumbled for her reading glasses and the local phone directory, her fingers clumsy with anxiety. She scanned the listings under veterinarians, most listed standard daytime hours. Then she saw it. Oakwood Emergency Veterinary Clinic open 24/7. Her relief was quickly tempered by the thought of the cost. Emergency vet visits weren't cheap, especially not on her fixed income. But looking at the suffering creature on her floor, she knew she had no choice. She dialed the number, her voice tight with worry. Yes, hello? I have a stray cat here. She just showed up. She's pregnant and I think she's in labor. She seems very weak. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. Dr. Ramirez, the vet on call, asked a few questions about the cat's condition. Could Margaret bring her in? Margaret explained her own limitations. She didn't drive at night anymore, and coaxing the distressed cat into a carrier, which she didn't own anyway, seemed impossible. After a moment's hesitation, Dr. Ramirez surprised her by saying, "Okay, Mrs. Abernathy. Okay, Mrs. Abernathy. Given the circumstances, and since you're only about 10 minutes away on Elm Street, I can come to you. It's not standard procedure, but it sounds urgent. Give me about 20 minutes." Gratitude washed over Margaret. While waiting, she sat on the cool kitchen floor beside the blanket, stroking the cat's bony back, gently avoiding the taut belly. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, her voice softer now. "Help is coming. You're safe here." The cat leaned slightly into her touch, a faint purr rumbling beneath the pained breaths, a tiny flicker of trust in the midst of its ordeal. The purr felt like a fragile gift. Dr. Ramirez arrived promptly, a woman likely in her late 30s with tired but kind eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately eased some of Margaret's tension. She brought a large medical bag and quickly assessed the situation. "Well, Mrs. Abernathy, you weren't kidding. She's definitely in active labor and quite malnourished. The vet's examination was gentle but efficient. Heartbeat is a bit fast. She's dehydrated. Let's see if we can make her comfortable and assist if needed." The birth process was slow and clearly agonizing for the small cat, Dr. Ramirez monitored her vital signs occasionally, offering quiet encouragement or adjusting the cat's position. Margaret hovered nearby, fetching towels, warm water, and anything else the vet requested, feeling both useless and essential. The first kitten arrived after nearly an hour, tiny, damp, and squirming feebly. The mother cat, despite her exhaustion, immediately turned and began licking at clean instinct, overriding pain. A second followed about 20 minutes later, then a third. Each tiny mule sent a pang through Margaret's heart. They seemed so fragile, so vulnerable. Dr. Ramirez checked each one quickly. They looked small underweight, likely due to Mom's condition, but they're breathing okay for now, she murmured. Then the fourth kitten began to emerge, and it was immediately clear something was wrong. It was positioned awkwardly, a breech birth. The mother cat cried out a sharp sound of distress and strained uselessly. Dr. Ramirez's calm professionalism intensified. "Okay, Mrs. Abernathy, I need to intervene here. Keep talking to her. Keep her calm if you can." With skilled hands, Dr. Ramirez carefully manipulated the kitten. Her brow furrowed in concentration. Margaret found herself stroking the mother cat's head, whispering nonsense, reassurances, her own fear palpable. After a few tense moments, the vet gently eased the fourth kitten out. It was worryingly still and silent. Dr. Ramirez immediately went to work, rubbing it vigorously with a towel, clearing its airways with a small bulb syringe. Seconds stretched into an eternity, then a tiny gasp followed by a weak, sputtering cry. Relief flooded the kitchen so potent it made Margaret feel dizzy. 4 kittens, all alive for now. The mother cat, utterly spent, nudged them closer, curling her depleted body around them. Dr. Ramirez administered subcutaneous fluids to the mother for dehydration and gave her a dose of antibiotics as a precaution. She examined the kittens again, paying extra attention to the fourth one, the smallest of the litter. "All right," the vet said, packing her bag. "Mom is exhausted, but stable. The kittens are alive, but they're going to need close monitoring, especially the little breech. Baby Mom needs good quality food, lots of water, and a quiet, warm place. Keep the bedding clean. The next 48 hours are critical for the little ones. They're susceptible to chilling and need to nurse effectively. Call me immediately if the mother seems lethargic, stops eating, or if any kitten stops nursing or feels cold." Then came the unavoidable part. Dr. Ramirez presented the bill. The house called the emergency intervention, the fluids, the medication. It totaled nearly $400. Margaret stared at the number, her stomach tightening. It was a significant chunk of her monthly budget. Frank's pension wasn't extravagant. She had savings, yes, but they were carefully guarded for property taxes, potential home repairs, or her own medical emergencies. This was an expense she hadn't remotely planned for. "I understand it's unexpected," Dr. Ramirez said gently, noticing her hesitation. "We can arrange a payment plan if that helps." Margaret nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, thank you. That would be helpful." She wrote out a check for the first installment, the pen feeling heavy in her hand. The financial weight settled upon her, a new layer of complication atop the emotional and practical demands of her unexpected house guests. As Dr. Ramirez left, promising to call and check in, Margaret looked at the small family huddled in the corner. The mother cat watched her with weary eyes that seemed to hold a flicker of gratitude, or was Margaret just projecting? The responsibility felt immense. She wasn't just providing temporary shelter anymore. She was committed financially and emotionally. As she cleaned up the used towels and prepared a more substantial meal for the new mother, who finally took a few tentative bites of the canned chicken, she noticed Mr. Henderson's porch light flick on next door. He peered out his window, his expression obscured by the darkness, but Margaret could feel his disapproving gaze even through the wall. Another complication. For the first time in 5 years, her quiet, predictable life felt overwhelmingly, terrifyingly full. The initial days blurred into a cycle of quiet vigilance and anxious care. Margaret established a routine dictated by the needs of the fragile feline family in her kitchen corner. She learned the subtle cues, the mother cat's soft chirp when she needed fresh water, the faint, almost imperceptible coolness of a kitten that had wriggled away from the maternal warmth, the frantic kneading of tiny paws that signaled successful nursing. She named the mother cat Hope, a name that felt both aspirational and a little desperate given the precariousness of their situation. Hope, despite her ordeal, proved to be a devoted mother, constantly grooming her kittens, nudging them towards her, and purring encouragement. She slowly regained some strength, eagerly accepting the high-quality kitten food Dr. Ramirez recommended Margaret purchase. Another hit to the budget, but Margaret didn't hesitate. Watching Hope's gentle care, her fierce protectiveness, despite her own weakened state, chipped away further at Margaret's remaining reservations. 3 of the kittens seemed to be thriving. They were gaining weight, their eyes beginning to open into tiny slits, their mews growing stronger. But the 4th kitten, the little Britch baby Margaret tentatively named Pip, remained alarmingly small and weak. He struggled to latch on effectively, often getting pushed aside by his more robust siblings. Margaret found herself intervening, constantly gently guiding Pip to a nipple, ensuring he got his share. She bought a small pet nursing kit and supplemented his feedings with kitten milk, replacing a painstaking process involving tiny bottles and even tinier drops of milk every few hours. Sleepless nights became the norm. Margaret set alarms, padding down to the kitchen in her bathrobe to check on Pip, warming him with a carefully wrapped heating pad, set on low, coaxing him to take just a little more milk. Exhaustion settled deep into her bones, a familiar ache from her early years of marriage when Frank worked nights, but one her 70-year-old body felt more acutely now. The house, once oppressively silent, was now filled with the soft sounds of nursing purring and the occasional kitten squeak, overlaid with Margaret's own quiet movements and whispered encouragements to Pip. Mr. Henderson's disapproval grew less subtle. He caught her outside one morning as she retrieved her newspaper. "Quite the commotion over there, Margaret," he'd said, his tone laced with accusation. "Heard a vet came by the other night. Stray animals carry diseases, you know, and pests. Hope you're not planning on keeping that." He gestured vaguely towards her house. Margaret, usually conflict-averse, felt a surprising surge of defensiveness. She needed help, George, and they're being well cared for. "Just saying," Henderson grumbled, "property values to think about and noise." He retreated back into his own pristine yard, leaving Margaret feeling both annoyed and slightly intimidated. What if he complained to the homeowners association even though she owned her house? Could they make trouble? The turning point came about a week after Hope's arrival. Despite Margaret's tireless efforts, Pip seemed to be fading. He was lethargic, his breathing shallow, his tiny body feeling colder than his siblings. Panic seized Margaret. She bundled Pip carefully into a towel-lined shoebox and called Dr. Ramirez, her voice shaking. "Bring him in immediately, Mrs. Abernathy," the vet said, her tone urgent. Margaret, overcoming her aversion to driving after dark for the first time in years, carefully placed the shoebox on the passenger seat and drove the short distance to the emergency clinic, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The waiting room was empty, thankfully, and Dr. Ramirez took Pip back right away. The minutes crawled by. Margaret sat alone, the sterile quiet of the clinic amplifying her fear. She thought about the cost. Another emergency visit, potentially expensive treatments. She thought about the emotional toll, the sleepless nights, the worry that gnawed at her constantly. Was she being foolish? A 70-year-old widow, pouring her limited resources and energy into saving one tiny, fragile life. Maybe Henderson was right. Maybe this was too much. Dr. Ramirez emerged, her expression serious. "Okay, Margaret." She began using her first name. "Pip is severely dehydrated and likely has aspiration pneumonia, probably from inhaling a little milk during the supplemental feeding, or perhaps from weakness at birth. He's also borderline hypoglycemic. He's a very sick little kitten." Margaret's heart sank. What can we do?" "We can hospitalize him," Dr. Ramirez said gently but directly. "Put him in an incubator with oxygen, administer intravenous fluids and antibiotics, provide nutritional support. It will give him the best chance. But," she paused, meeting Margaret's eyes, "it will be intensive and, frankly, quite expensive. There are no guarantees, especially with kittens this young and compromised." She laid out the estimated costs for hospitalization and critical care, a sum that made Margaret's breath catch. It was more than her entire monthly pension check. It would mean dipping significantly into the savings she'd guarded so carefully, the money earmarked for property taxes due in a few months, or a new water heater, or unforeseen medical bills of her own. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. She could choose the sensible path, acknowledge she'd done her best, perhaps opt for euthanasia to end Pip's suffering and focus on hope and the healthier kittens. It would be financially prudent, less emotionally draining. Or she could commit fully and unequivocally, throwing caution, budget, and practicality to the wind for this tiny scrap of life that had somehow burrowed its way into her heart. She looked at Dr. Ramirez, thought of Pip's feeble struggles, of Hope's trusting eyes, of the silence that had filled her house for 5 long years. Frank's imagined voice echoed again. "Sometimes you just gotta do what's right, not what's easy." Saving Pip wasn't easy. It wasn't sensible. But letting him go felt fundamentally wrong. Hospitalize him. Margaret said, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. "Do whatever you need to do, Doctor. We have to give him a chance." In that moment, something shifted within Margaret. The hesitant rescuer became a determined advocate. The lonely widow found a fierce protective purpose. She was no longer just reacting to the situation that had landed on her doorstep. She was actively choosing to fight, regardless of the cost. She would worry about the money later. Right now, Pip needed her, Hope needed her, and maybe, just maybe, she needed them too. The decision felt terrifying, reckless, and absolutely necessary. The following days were a crucible. Pip remained in the veterinary hospital's incubator, a tiny figure surrounded by tubes and monitors. Margaret visited daily, usually in the quiet afternoon hours. She would sit by the incubator, Speaking softly to the kitten, willing him to fight, Dr. Ramirez provided cautious updates. Pip was responding slowly to the antibiotics. His breathing was slightly less labored. He was tolerating the feeding tube, but he remained critically ill. "He's a fighter, Margaret," Dr. Ramirez admitted one afternoon, "but it's still touch and go. Kittens this young can turn quickly either way." Each visit meant another entry on the growing bill. Margaret transferred a substantial amount from her savings account to cover the initial deposit and ongoing care, trying not to dwell on the dwindling balance. The practicalities were stark. She postponed scheduling her own annual checkup, scrutinized grocery flyers for sales, and turned the thermostat down a couple of degrees, pulling on one of Frank's old sweaters for warmth. The financial strain was a constant low-level hum beneath the acute anxiety for Pip. Back home, Hope seemed to sense the absence of her smallest kitten. She would sniff around the nesting box occasionally, letting out a soft, questioning meow. Margaret spent extra time with her and the remaining 3 kittens, now playfully tumbling over each other with growing energy, reassuring the mother cat, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. She kept the kitchen corner meticulously clean, changing the bedding frequently, monitoring Hope's appetite and the kitten's growth, terrified that another crisis might erupt. Mr. Henderson remained a persistent irritant. He'd taken to making pointed comments whenever he saw her. "Still got those animals?" he'd ask, wrinkling his nose. Thought animal control would have dealt with strays. One afternoon, he left a copy of the borough's ordinances regarding pets in her mailbox. With the section on nuisances highlighted, Margaret felt a flare of anger mixed with apprehension. She hadn't received any formal complaints, but his passive aggression was wearing on her nerves. Could he actually force her to get rid of Hope and the kittens, especially after everything she was investing in them? The thought added another layer of stress to her already burdened state. Exhaustion became Margaret's shadow. The worry, the financial stress, the trips to the vet clinic, the care for the remaining cats, and the underlying thrum of loneliness and grief left her feeling drained both physically and emotionally. One particularly bleak evening, after a difficult visit, where Pip had seemed slightly less responsive, Margaret sat alone in her quiet living room, the silence pressing in on her. Doubt, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. Was she crazy? Pouring her heart, her energy, her precious savings into a situation that seemed increasingly precarious. She was 70 years old. Her friends were downsizing, traveling, enjoying their retirements. She was scrubbing kitten messes, measuring formula, and praying over an incubator Frank would have supported her, she knew. But he wasn't here. Her only daughter lived across the country in Oregon, busy with her own family, and while supportive during their brief phone calls, couldn't truly grasp the intensity of Margaret's current reality. Margaret felt profoundly alone in her struggle. Was Pip's life worth jeopardizing her own stability? Was this whole endeavor a foolish attempt to fill the void Frank had left a desperate grasp for purpose that was ultimately doomed to fail? This was her dark night of the soul, a moment where the weight of her decision felt almost unbearable. She cried, then silent tears, soaking into the worn fabric of Frank's armchair, mourning not just the potential loss of Pip, but the loss of her own quiet, uncomplicated life. But morning brought a fragile clarity. As she measured out food for Hope, the mother cat rubbed against her legs, purring loudly, a gesture of simple affection and trust. The three healthy kittens tumbled nearby, miniature versions of their mother full of burgeoning life. Giving up on Pip felt like giving up on hope, both the cat and the concept. It felt like betraying the commitment she had made, not just to the animals, but to herself. The commitment to choose compassion over caution, action over apathy. She called the clinic, bracing herself. Dr. Ramirez answered, "Margaret, good morning. Actually, I was about to call you." Margaret held her breath. Pip had a relatively good night. His temperature is stable, his breathing is noticeably better, and he actually responded when the technician cleaned his face this morning. He tried to groom her finger. A small sound escaped Margaret, a sob of relief. "It's still a long road," Dr. Ramirez cautioned, "but this is the first significant positive sign we've seen. He might just make it." Hope surged back, fierce and bright. Pip was fighting, and so would she. Dr. Ramirez suggested that if he continued to improve over the next 24-48 hours, he might be stable enough to come home, though he would still require intensive nursing care. The prospect was daunting, but also exhilarating. It meant the mounting hospital bills would cease, but the responsibility for his fragile life would fall squarely back onto her shoulders. She spent the rest of the day preparing, cleaning the nesting area again, buying more kitten formula, rereading the care instructions Dr. Ramirez had given her. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by focused determination. She checked her savings account balance online, winced, and then firmly closed the browser window, one step at a time. The next crucial step was getting Pip home. The final confrontation wasn't with Mr. Henderson or even the mounting vet bills, but with the fragility of life itself embodied in one tiny kitten. The climax would be bringing him home, facing the challenge of keeping him alive outside the safety net of the clinic's incubator. 2 days later, Dr. Ramirez called with the news Margaret had been desperately hoping for. He's stable enough. Margaret, still very fragile, needs round-the-clock care, but the oxygen and IV fluids are no longer strictly necessary. I think being back with his mother and siblings might do him good, provided you can manage the intensive nursing. Are you ready to bring Pip home? Margaret's heart leapt. Yes, oh yes, doctor. Thank you. I'll be there as soon as I can. The drive to the clinic felt electric. She paid the final staggering installment of the hospital bill with a tremor in her hand, but a firmness in her resolve. Dr. Ramirez brought Pip out, nestled in a warm towel inside the same shoebox Margaret had brought him in. He looked impossibly tiny, almost lost in the folds, but his eyes were open, alert, and he let out a faint, squeaky meow when he heard Margaret's voice. He'll need bottle feeding every 2 to 3 hours. Dr. Ramirez instructed, going over the medications, antibiotic supplements, and the feeding schedule one last time. Keep him warm, watch his breathing, make sure he's stimulated to go to the bathroom after feedings. Call me with any change, day or night, any regression. Bring him back immediately. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Margaret, but this time it was mingled with overwhelming relief and joy. Bringing Pip back into the kitchen was a moment thick with anticipation. Margaret gently placed the shoebox near Hope's nesting corner. Hope lifted her head, alert, her ears swiveling. She crept towards the box, sniffing cautiously. She recognized the scent instantly. A low, rumbling purr started deep in her chest. She nudged the box gently with her nose, then peered inside at her missing baby. Pip, smelling his mother, let out another tiny squeak. Hope responded with a soft chirp, then began to lick Pip's head carefully, her rough tongue gentle against his fragile fur. The other three kittens, curious, tumbled over to investigate, sniffing their brother before accepting him back into the fold without fuss. Hope nudged Pip closer, encouraging him to burrow against her warmth alongside his siblings. Margaret watched, tears welling in her eyes. It felt like a miracle. The critical moment wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a medical procedure, but this quiet, instinctual reunion. Pip was home. He was accepted. He had survived the worst thanks to veterinary science and Margaret's unwavering commitment. The central question, would Pip live, had shifted from a desperate hope to a fragile, tangible reality. The battle wasn't over. The intensive home care was just beginning. But seeing him nestled safely with his mother, surrounded by the warmth and comfort of his family, felt like the turning point, the victory. After the long siege, he was home. The weeks that followed were demanding, but filled with a new kind of energy. Margaret fell into a rhythm of care, juggling Pip's frequent feedings and medication schedule with the needs of Hope and the other kittens. Now boisterous and exploring bundles of fluff, Pip remained smaller than his siblings, bearing the physical marks of his difficult start. But he grew steadily stronger under Margaret's devoted nursing. He developed a particular bond with her, often falling asleep in her cupped hand after a feeding, his tiny motor rumbling contentedly. As the kittens grew, Margaret knew she couldn't realistically keep all four plus Hope long term. It wouldn't be fair to them or manageable for her both financially and practically. With Dr. Ramirez's help, she began networking with local rescue groups known for their thorough vetting processes. It was important that they went to loving, responsible homes. Letting them go would be hard, a bittersweet pang after all they'd been through together. But it was the right thing to do. She decided unequivocally to keep Hope. The bond between them was deep, forged in crisis, and cemented by quiet companionship, and she would keep Pip. The tiny fighter she had poured so much into felt inextricably hers. His survival was her victory, a testament to her unexpected capacity for fierce devotion. One sunny afternoon, representatives from a reputable rescue came to meet the kittens. They were charmed by the playful trio and impressed by Margaret's detailed records of their care. Two were quickly spoken for by pre-approved adopters. The third found a home a week later. Each farewell was a tug at Margaret's heart, but seeing them go to eager, loving families eased the sadness. Life settled into a new normal. The house on Elm Street was no longer silent. It echoed with the soft padding of Hope's paws, the surprisingly loud purr of Pip demanding attention, the skittering sounds of kitten toys battered across the floor. Margaret still missed Frank terribly, but the sharp edges of loneliness had softened, replaced by the gentle warmth of companionship and purpose. The vet bills had taken a significant bite out of her savings, but she found she didn't regret it. She managed her budget even more carefully, finding satisfaction in simple routines centered around her feline family. Even Mr. Henderson seemed to soften slightly. He never apologized, but one morning, Margaret saw him watching Pip, now a lanky adolescent cat, awkwardly chasing a blowing leaf across her lawn. Henderson didn't scowl. He almost smiled. He simply nodded curtly at Margaret and went back inside. It wasn't friendship, but it felt like a truce. Margaret sat on her back porch swing one crisp autumn evening. A year after Hope's desperate arrival, Hope dozed peacefully at her feet, while Pip, sleek and healthy, despite his smaller size, batted playfully at the tassels on Margaret's blanket. The air was cool, the familiar scent of burning leaves hung in the air, but the silence was gone, replaced by the comforting sounds of life. She had faced the unbelievable, the demanding, the potentially heartbreaking, and emerged not diminished, but somehow more herself. The quiet widow of Elm Street had become unexpectedly a cat rescuer, her heart and home filled once more. We regretted it after going home, so we went back to rescue the stray cat. What happens when regret forces you back into the path of a creature you left to die? She went back for the cat, but the shocking truth about why it couldn't walk was worse than she imagined. Subscribe, like, and listen to the full story of impossible odds and unwavering love. The rough texture of the carrier's plastic handle dug into Martha's fingers, a grounding counterpoint to the frantic pounding in her chest. Beneath the sparse cover of the overgrown azalea bushes, the damp earth pressed cold against her knees. Dusk was bleeding into true night, swallowing the last vestiges of color from the park, leaving only deepening shades of gray and black. Her flashlight beam, already weak, trembled violently, reflecting off a pair of eyes that barely registered the light. They were dull, almost lifeless, set deep in a small skeletal face covered in matted orange fur. "It's okay," Martha whispered, her voice hoarse, catching in her throat. "It's okay, little one. I'm here to help." The words sounded hollow, inadequate against the chilling stillness emanating from the small form huddled on the ground. Phoenix. The name had sprung into her mind unbidden, a desperate prayer for resurrection. Didn't flinch, didn't hiss, didn't even seem to breathe. Was she too late? Had the flicker of life she'd convinced herself she'd seen earlier finally guttered out while she'd rushed home and back? Her hands, clumsy with cold and adrenaline, fumbled with the latch on the plastic carrier. She'd opened a can of the most pungent tuna she owned, the metallic, oily smell sharp in the cool air, and placed it near the cat's nose. There was no reaction, no twitch of whiskers, no weak attempt to lift its head. Panic tightened its icy grip around Martha's heart. This wasn't like coaxing a wary stray. This felt like handling something already halfway across the veil. A twig snapped nearby. Martha froze, whipping the flashlight beam towards the sound. Nothing but deeper shadows and the rustle of unseen nocturnal creatures. Still, the noise amplified her sense of desperate urgency. The park would be closing soon, the gates locked. She couldn't leave him here, not now. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she reached out a hesitant hand, her fingers brushing against the cat's fur. It was shockingly cold and damp, clinging to bones that felt terrifyingly fragile beneath the skin. There was no resistance, no response at all. Gently, ever so gently, using the soft blanket she'd brought as a scoop, she slid it beneath the limp body. He weighed almost nothing. With agonizing slowness, she lifted the blanket and its precious, terrifyingly still burden, maneuvering it towards the open carrier door. He was in. She latched the door, the click echoing unnaturally loud in the near silence. Kneeling there in the dark, damp bushes, the weight of the carrier suddenly feeling immense, the full magnitude of what she had done, what she had taken on, crashed down upon her. This wasn't just rescuing a stray. This was potentially inviting heartbreak, staggering expense, and endless worry into her quiet, solitary life. And looking down at the carrier, at the small, unmoving lump within the most terrifying question, wasn't if she could handle it, but if there was even anything left to save. Martha Jenkins had curated a life of careful quiet in the 6 years since her husband George had succumbed to a sudden heart attack. Their house, a modest brick ranch on a tree-lined street bordering Oak Knoll Park in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, felt cavernous, without his booming laugh and constant puttering. Her 2 children, both successful and living on opposite coasts, called dutifully and visited for holidays, their lives bustling with careers and grandchildren, worlds away from her own measured existence. She filled her days with routine, tending her small rose garden, volunteering at the library twice a week, rereading beloved novels, and taking long, solitary walks through the familiar paths of Oak Knoll Park. It wasn't a bad life, she told herself. It was peaceful, predictable, but a persistent low hum of loneliness underscored everything. A void George's vibrant presence had effortlessly filled. Her afternoon walk in the park was usually the highlight of her day, a time for quiet reflection amidst the changing seasons. That crisp October afternoon had started no differently. The autumn leaves were at their peak, a riot of crimson, gold, and russet under a clear blue sky. She strolled along her usual route, nodding politely to other walkers lost in thought. It was near the old stone bench overlooking the duck pond that she saw him, a patch of orange fur huddled unmoving beneath the bench. At first, she thought it might be a discarded scarf or hat, but then the patch shivered, curiosity piqued. Martha stepped off the path for a closer look. It was a cat painfully thin, its ginger coat dull and matted. As she approached it, tried to scramble away, but its hind legs seemed to buckle, dragging uselessly. It stumbled, collapsed onto its side with a weak cry, then lay still, panting heavily, its gaze fixed on her with wide, terrified eyes. A wave of pity washed over Martha. The poor creature was obviously desperately ill or injured, starving, and utterly helpless. But alongside the pity came a surge of apprehension. She was alone. The cat was clearly suffering, possibly contagious. Catching it would be difficult, maybe dangerous, if it lashed out in fear. And then what vet bills could be astronomical. She lived on a fixed income, carefully budgeting George's pension and her Social Security. Taking on a sick animal, it was a responsibility she hadn't sought, one she wasn't sure she could handle emotionally or financially. She stood there for a long moment, conflicted. Part of her, the part that remembered George's boundless compassion for all creatures, urged her to act. Another part, the pragmatic, solitary widow part, whispered caution. Someone else will find it. The cautious voice rationalized. Maybe animal control makes regular rounds. It's probably very old near its end anyway. The excuses felt flimsy, even as she thought them. With a heavy heart and a backward glance filled with unease, Martha turned and continued her walk, forcing herself not to look back at the small, suffering creature beneath the bench. The rest of the walk felt hollow. The vibrant leaves seemed less bright, the cheerful chirping of birds grating. Back in the sterile quiet of her house, the silence pressed in on her, amplifying the memory of the cat's stumbling gait and desperate eyes. She tried to read, but the words blurred. She attempted a crossword puzzle, but her mind wouldn't focus. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to echo her guilt. She saw the cat's image superimposed on the familiar patterns of her wallpaper, felt its phantom weight in the empty chair opposite hers. George's voice echoed in her memory, a conversation from years ago when they'd found an injured bird in the yard. "Compassion isn't convenient, Martha. It demands something of us." She had failed that demand today. She had seen suffering and chosen convenience, chosen caution over kindness. This crushing weight of regret was the true inciting incident. It wasn't a single event, but a growing, unbearable tide of guilt that finally broke her inertia. She couldn't live with the knowledge that she had walked away, leaving that creature to die alone under a park bench. Forget the cost. Forget the difficulty. She had to go back. She had to try with a newfound, albeit anxious resolve. Martha grabbed her keys. The old cat carrier from the garage, a can of tuna, and a soft blanket, her earlier hesitation replaced by the urgent need to undo her mistake. The drive back to Oak Knoll Park was fraught with anxiety. Martha gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. What if he wasn't there? What if animal control had come? What if he'd crawled away somewhere hidden to die? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, and the air had turned noticeably cooler. She parked as close to the duck pond area as she could, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She hurried along the path carrier, banging against her leg, scanning the area around the stone bench. Empty. The space beneath it, where the little orange cat had collapsed, held nothing but dry leaves. A wave of cold dread washed over her. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." She started searching systematically, peering under bushes, checking behind trees. Her calls of "Kitty here, kitty, kitty," sounding thin and desperate in the open air. A young couple jogging past gave her curious looks, but didn't stop. An older man walking, his beagle, paused. "Lose your cat, ma'am?" he asked kindly. Martha explained quickly, describing the sick orange cat she'd seen earlier. The man frowned in thought. "Orange cat, thin. Yeah, I think I saw him maybe half an hour ago back over there." He pointed towards a denser thicket of bushes near the park's perimeter fence. "Looked in real bad shape, dragging his back legs. Didn't think he'd last long, poor thing." His words, meant perhaps to be helpful, only amplified Martha's fear, but also gave her a direction. Thanking him, she plunged into the indicated area, pushing aside branches, scanning the undergrowth. The light was fading fast now, making it difficult to see. She swept her weak flashlight beam back and forth, searching for any sign of orange fur. She saw discarded wrappers, fallen branches, even unsettlingly, a few scattered feathers that made her stomach clench. Had a predator found him first? Just as despair began to set in, she heard it. A faint rattling sound, almost too soft to be a meow, more like a pained exhalation. It came from deep within a large azalea thicket. Holding her breath, Martha pushed aside the dense leaves, and there he was, curled into a tight ball on the cold, damp earth, looking even smaller and more fragile than before. He didn't lift his head, didn't react to the light. She could see the shallow, rapid movement of his breathing, but little else. This was the moment described in The Hook. The terrifying stillness, the frantic fumbling with the carrier, the overwhelming sense of responsibility crashing down as she finally secured the nearly lifeless cat inside. The drive to the emergency vet clinic, Dr. Evans' regular practice was closed for the day, felt agonizingly long. Martha kept glancing at the carrier on the passenger seat, praying for a sign of movement, any sign of life. Phoenix remained terrifyingly still. The clinic buzzed with a low level of controlled chaos. Barking dogs, anxious owners briskly moving staff. Martha, clutching the carrier, explained the situation to the receptionist, her voice trembling. A technician whisked Phoenix away immediately to the treatment area. Martha was left alone in the waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights reflecting off the sterile floor, the antiseptic smell sharp in her nostrils. Time stretched each minute an eternity. Finally, a younger veterinarian, Dr. Ramirez, appeared, his expression serious. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm Dr. Ramirez. We've started working on Phoenix. You said—" Martha nodded mutely. "He's in critical condition, severe dehydration, hypothermia, and extremely malnourished. He's little more than skin and bones. His breathing is very shallow, and he's barely responsive." He explained the immediate steps: warming blankets, subcutaneous fluids to start rehydrating him, gently checking his blood glucose, which was dangerously low. "We've given him a little dextrose." Dr. Ramirez continued, "His temperature is starting to come up very slowly, which is a positive sign, but he's far from stable. He's also showing signs of a severe upper respiratory infection, discharge from his eyes and nose, congested breathing." Martha absorbed the information, her mind racing. What caused him to be unable to walk? She asked, remembering his stumbling in the park. Dr. Ramirez frowned. "It's hard to say definitively right now. Extreme weakness from starvation and illness can certainly cause collapse. But given the way you described him dragging his legs, we also need to consider injury. Perhaps trauma from being hit by something, though there are no obvious external wounds, or neurological issues, or even severe untreated arthritis. Once we get him stabilized, we'll need to do X-rays and blood work to understand the full picture." Stabilization, the word hung in the air. It wasn't guaranteed. Martha felt a wave of dizziness. The technician reappeared at that moment with an estimate for the initial emergency care and overnight stabilization. Martha looked at the figure, her breath catching. It was more than she'd budgeted for groceries for the entire month. She swallowed hard, her earlier resolve warring with the stark financial reality. But then she pictured Phoenix's dull eyes, his chilling stillness. She thought of George. She thought of her own moment of walking away. There was no real choice. "Do it," she said, her voice clearer now. "Do whatever you need to do to help him." She handed over her credit card, the plastic feeling flimsy and inadequate against the weight of the life hanging in the balance. The initial obstacle wasn't just finding Phoenix. It was facing the immediate, daunting cost of simply keeping him alive through the night. The stakes were clear: Phoenix's life and Martha's ability to sustain the commitment she had made in that dark park thicket. The night was endless. Martha went home, but sleep refused to come. She wandered through the silent house, the empty rooms echoing her anxiety. She brewed tea. She didn't drink, straightened cushions that were already neat, and stared at the phone, willing it to ring with good news, dreading it might bring the worst. Every creak of the old house sounded ominous. Every shadow seemed to hold a question. Had she done the right thing? Could he possibly survive? She called the clinic at midnight, then again at 3 a.m. The overnight technician reported Phoenix was holding steady. His temperature was slowly normalizing. The IV fluids were helping, but he remained largely unresponsive. his breathing shallow. He's a very sick little cat, Mrs. Jenkins. The technician said gently, "We're doing everything we can." Holding steady felt like both a victory and a terrifyingly fragile state. The next morning, exhausted and heartsick, Martha drove back to the clinic. Dr. Ramirez met her with a cautiously optimistic update. He made it through the night, which is a significant hurdle. He's slightly more responsive this morning. He blinked when I checked his eyes, and his breathing is a tiny bit deeper. We started him on antibiotics for the respiratory infection and some nutritional support through the IV. But the cautious optimism faded as he discussed the test results. The blood work confirmed severe anemia and markers of infection as expected with his level of neglect and starvation. The x-rays, well, they give us more to think about. He pulled up the images on a monitor. No obvious signs of recent trauma like broken bones. But look here, he pointed to Phoenix's spine and hips. There's significant evidence of chronic inflammation and degenerative changes. Severe arthritis, most likely, and possibly some narrowing of the spinal canal in his lower back. This would absolutely explain the difficulty walking, the weakness, and the probable chronic pain he's been enduring. He paused, letting the information sink in. There might also be an underlying neurological component contributing to the weakness, but that's harder to assess until he's stronger. He turned from the monitor, his expression compassionate but direct. Mrs. Jenkins Phoenix is facing a very long uphill battle. Even if we can get him past this critical stage, manage the infection, and address the malnutrition, he will likely always have mobility issues. He'll need ongoing pain management, possibly physical therapy, special accommodations at home. It's a massive undertaking for any cat, let alone one starting from such a debilitated state. He hesitated, then continued gently. Given his severe condition, the chronic pain he's likely experiencing from the arthritis, and the intensity of the care required, we need to discuss quality of life. Sometimes in situations, this severe humane euthanasia is the kindest option to consider. It would end his suffering peacefully. This was the midpoint, the stark, devastating reality laid bare. It wasn't just about nursing a starved cat back to health. It was about managing chronic, potentially debilitating conditions requiring intensive, expensive, long-term care. The vet's suggestion of euthanasia, offered kindly and professionally, forced Martha to confront the true depth of the commitment she had implicitly made. Could she provide the life Phoenix needed? Was it fair to him to prolong his suffering if his quality of life would always be poor? Doubt, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. She looked through the glass window into the treatment area, where Phoenix lay in a small incubator cage hooked up to IV lines, looking impossibly small and fragile. He wasn't moving, but she could see the faint rise and fall of his blanketed side. She remembered his eyes in the park, terrified, yes, but alive. She remembered the faintest pressure, almost imagined, when his head had brushed her hand as she'd lifted him. She remembered George saying, "Compassion demanded something of us." Euthanasia felt like walking away all over again, a final irreversible abandonment disguised as kindness. The turning point came swift and absolute. No. Martha said, her voice surprisingly firm, cutting through her own fear and doubt. No euthanasia. Not while there's still a chance. He fought to stay alive this long out there alone. The least I can do is fight for him now. She met Dr. Ramirez's gaze directly. "Tell me what he needs." "Pain management therapy, special food, whatever it is. I understand it will be difficult. I understand the cost, but I will do it. We will manage it." In that moment, Martha transformed. The hesitant rescuer, grappling with guilt, became Phoenix's unwavering advocate, his dedicated caretaker. She was no longer reacting to circumstance. She was proactively choosing his future, accepting the full burden and uncertainty it entailed. There was no safety net, no easy way out. She had looked into the abyss of his suffering and her own limitations and chosen to stand her ground, to fight alongside him. This was her point of no return. Phoenix's fate and a significant portion of her own remaining life was now inextricably bound to the decision made in that sterile vet clinic hallway. Bringing Phoenix home a few days later felt both triumphant and terrifying. He was still incredibly weak, the fur shaved in patches where IV lines had been, but he was alive, breathing on his own, and occasionally opening his eyes to blink slowly at his new surroundings. Dr. Evans, Martha's regular vet, who had taken over his case from the emergency clinic, had equipped Martha with a daunting arsenal of medications: antibiotics, pain relievers for the arthritis appetite, stimulants, eye ointments, and high-calorie nutritional gel. She had also provided detailed instructions for supportive care. Martha converted her small guest bathroom into a temporary recovery suite. It was warm, quiet, easy to clean, and small enough that Phoenix wouldn't feel overwhelmed or try to move too much. She lined a low-sided box with soft blankets and a heating pad set on low, creating a cozy nest. She placed shallow dishes of water and softened prescription food nearby, though Phoenix showed little interest in eating on his own. Yet, the following weeks blurred into a cycle of demanding round-the-clock care that pushed Martha to her physical and emotional limits. Phoenix required syringe feeding every few hours with a special high-calorie liquid diet, a slow, painstaking process as he often had difficulty swallowing or would only take a tiny amount before turning his head away. Administering medications was another challenge. Crushing pills, measuring liquids, gently applying eye ointment to his still inflamed eyes, all while trying not to cause him further stress. His arthritis made handling him tricky. She had to learn how to lift and support him without causing pain to his sensitive joints and spine. Cleaning him was essential, as he was often too weak to groom himself properly. There were small victories that kept Martha going. The first time Phoenix lapped a little water on his own. The first faint rumbling purr when she gently stroked his head, the day his eyes started to look clearer, less clouded by infection. The first time he made a weak attempt to knead the blankets with his front paws. These moments were islands of hope in a sea of exhaustion and worry, but setbacks were frequent and terrifying. Nights when his breathing became shallow and rapid again, requiring Martha to sit beside him, monitoring every breath, wondering if she should rush him back to the emergency clinic days when he refused all food, even by syringe, making her fear he was giving up mornings when he seemed too weak to even lift his head. During these dark night of the soul moments, doubt would creep back in. Was she just prolonging his suffering? Was Dr. Ramirez right about euthanasia having been the kinder path? The financial strain mounted relentlessly. Follow-up vet visits, ongoing medications, prescription food. The costs added up quickly, forcing Martha to make difficult choices. She dipped into her emergency savings, then started cutting corners elsewhere. She canceled her annual trip to visit her daughter in California, explaining vaguely about unexpected home repairs. She started buying cheaper brands at the grocery store, turned her thermostat down even lower, and meticulously reviewed her bills, looking for any possible savings. She even quietly sold a small porcelain music box. George had given her a piece she cherished, telling herself Phoenix needed the money more than she needed the keepsake. It was a painful sacrifice, highlighting the depth of her commitment. Amidst the struggle, a quiet bond began to form between woman and cat. Phoenix, perhaps sensing Martha's unwavering dedication, slowly began to trust her. He stopped flinching when she reached for him, started leaning into her touch during medication time. His weak purr became a more frequent response to her soft voice. Martha found herself talking to him constantly, narrating her day, telling him stories about George, confiding her worries and hopes. He became the focal point of her existence, his fragile life giving hers a profound, albeit demanding, new purpose. Support came from an unexpected source. Her neighbor, Jed Henderson, the same gruff widower from the previous story variations, though no puppy existed in this one, noticed Martha seemed more tired and preoccupied than usual. When she finally explained about Phoenix, expecting skepticism, Jed surprised her. He didn't offer platitudes, but he started showing up with practical help, offering to pick up her groceries when he went mowing her lawn without being asked, even once bringing over a specially designed heated pet bed he'd found online. "Figured the little fella could use it," he mumbled gruffly. His quiet, practical support was a lifeline, reminding Martha she wasn't entirely alone in her struggle. As autumn deepened towards winter, Phoenix had made slow but undeniable progress. He was putting on a little weight. His coat looked healthier, and the respiratory infection had cleared. He could now eat soft food on his own, albeit slowly. His mobility remained severely limited. He could pull himself short distances with his front legs, but couldn't stand or walk properly. Dr. Evans had shown Martha gentle, passive range of motion exercises to help maintain flexibility in his stiff hind legs. He spent most of his time resting in his heated bed, watching Martha with intelligent, increasingly alert eyes. He was alive, relatively comfortable, and seemed to possess a quiet determination that mirrored Martha's own. But his underlying conditions made him incredibly fragile. Martha knew that a setback, an infection, or a sudden crisis could undo all their progress in an instant. The tension remained a constant awareness of the precipice upon which Phoenix's life still rested, building towards an inevitable test of their resilience. The crisis came without warning on a cold, rainy Tuesday morning. Martha had just finished giving Phoenix his morning medications and was preparing his breakfast slurry. He had seemed a little lethargic, but nothing overtly alarming. She turned back from the counter, syringe in hand, and froze. Phoenix was rigid in his bed, his head thrown back at an unnatural angle, his body convulsing violently. A seizure. Martha's blood ran cold. Dr. Evans had warned this was a possibility given the potential for neurological involvement, but seeing it happen was terrifying beyond measure. Her training kicked in over the panic. She remembered Dr. Evans' instructions. Don't restrain him, move anything nearby. He could hit time the seizure. Her hand shook as she cleared the space around his bed, her eyes locked on his small, jerking form. She glanced at the clock, noting the time. The seizure seemed to go on forever, though it was likely only a minute or two. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wide and unseeing. Martha felt utterly helpless, able only to watch and whisper useless words of comfort. Just as suddenly as it started, the convulsions stopped. Phoenix lay limp, utterly spent, his breathing dangerously shallow, almost non-existent. Martha gently checked his airway. Clear. She felt for a pulse. Faint, thready. He wasn't breathing properly. This was it. The moment she had dreaded, she had to act now. Remembering the emergency CPR instructions Dr. Evans had demonstrated, just in case, the vet had said, Martha took a deep breath, tilted Phoenix's head back slightly, closed his mouth, and breathed 2 small puffs of air into his nostrils, watching his chest. She then placed her hand around his rib cage just behind his front legs and started chest compressions. Firm, rapid, praying she was doing it right, praying she wasn't hurting his fragile body further. "Come on, Phoenix," she pleaded between breaths and compressions, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you leave me now. Fight. Please fight." She repeated the cycle. Breaths, compressions, breaths, compressions. Her own breath coming in ragged sobs, her arms aching. Doubt screamed in her mind. "It's too late. He's gone. You can't do this." But she pushed it away, focusing only on the rhythm, on the desperate hope fueling her actions. Then a shudder ran through Phoenix's small body, a tiny gasp. Then another, stronger one. He coughed weakly, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused, but seeing he was breathing again on his own, shallowly, but breathing. The immediate crisis, the terrifying brush with death, had passed. Martha collapsed back on her heels, weak with relief and adrenaline gently stroking Phoenix's fur as his breathing slowly steadied. She had faced the ultimate test, stared death in the face alongside him, and her commitment, her refusal to give up, had pulled him back from the brink. She knew they weren't out of the woods. He needed immediate veterinary follow-up. But in that moment, the core question was answered. She could fight for him, and he, against all odds, still had fight left in him. The seizure prompted another vet visit and adjustments to Phoenix's medication, adding an anticonvulsant to his daily regimen. Recovery was slow, but the bond between Martha and Phoenix deepened into an unbreakable trust. Winter gave way to spring, and life in Martha's house found its unique rhythm, dictated by medication schedules, gentle therapy sessions, and the quiet presence of the cat who had defied death. Phoenix never regained full mobility. He remained mostly reliant on his front legs, pulling himself around his designated safe spaces in the house with a surprising determination. He still needed daily pain medication and careful monitoring, but his transformation from the near-death creature in the park was miraculous. His orange coat grew thick and glossy. His eyes were bright and alert. He ate well, purred readily at Martha's touch, and enjoyed long naps in sunny spots by the window. He couldn't jump or run, but he radiated a quiet contentment, a sense of security he had likely never known before. Martha's life had also transformed. The aching void left by George hadn't vanished, but it was softened, filled now with the constant, gentle demands of Phoenix's care. Her days were no longer marked by solitary routine, but by the needs of another living being. The financial strain remained a careful balancing act, but the rewards were immeasurable. Friends sometimes questioned the burden she had taken on, but Martha knew they didn't understand. Phoenix wasn't a burden. He was her purpose. In rescuing him and fighting for his right to a comfortable, loved life despite his limitations, she had rediscovered her own resilience, her own capacity for love and unwavering commitment. Jed Henderson remained a quiet ally, often dropping by simply to sit with Martha and watch Phoenix dozing in his heated bed. Never thought he'd make it. Jed admitted one sunny afternoon, "You did good, Martha, real good." In the quiet evenings, Martha would sit in her armchair reading while Phoenix rested nearby, his low purr a gentle counterpoint to the ticking clock. Sometimes he would pull himself closer, resting his head on her foot. Looking at him, seeing the peace in his posture, Martha felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The regret that had driven her back to the park that fateful autumn day had been replaced by a quiet joy. She had saved Phoenix, yes, but in doing so, she had also saved herself from a life slowly fading into shades of gray. Together, the lonely widow and the broken cat had built a new life, proving that compassion could indeed rise, phoenix-like, from the ashes of despair.